welcome to this section of another important questions, which are frequently asked in interview. And today, uh, we are going to review the difference between EBS and EFS. So what is the difference? What are the major differences between EBS and EFS? So first of all, EBS stands for Elastic Block Storage, right? Elastic Block Storage. And EFS stands for Elastic File System. Elastic File System. So Elastic Block Storage is something where you can store your data, or a company or corporation can store its data. And Elastic File System is like a shared file system where a team can share the data in split second and can use or utilize that data very fastly. Now, moving on to the actual differences. The difference between EBS and EFS is that you have to provision your Elastic Block Storage, service. You have to provision. That means the meaning of provisioning means that if you want to use 50 gigs of or 50 gigabytes of storage, you have to provision it. That means you can acquire 50 gigabytes on the go. And whether you are using 10 gigabytes out of the 50 gigabytes or 30 gigabytes out of 50 gigabytes, it doesn't matter. You are paying the bill for whole 50 gigabytes of space. Whereas on the other hand, you will be billing or your bill will be generated according to the pay per use, right? So according to the usage, your bill is generated with respect to EFS, right? In EBS, you can attach only one instance at a time. So if you are using an EC2 instance and if you want to attach an EBS, you can attach only one instance at a time. Although multi-attach EBS volumes are currently present in the in the system, but at the time of at this particular time, you can attach one instance at a time to an EBS. Then in EFS, there is no limit. You can attach thousands of concurrent clients to a single Elastic file system where they can share the data simultaneously, right? Elastic Block Storage is locked at AZ level, that is availability zone level. That means the EBS volume, right? Your EBS volume and the EC2 instance to which it is being attached must be in the same availability zone. So that is the condition. Whereas it doesn't matter in the case of Elastic file system, it can be in multiple availability zone. Yeah, or the EC2 instance or EC2 instances can be in different availability zone, right? And last but not the least, Elastic Block Storage supports Windows and Linux, whereas EFS supports only Linux. EFS supports only Linux, right? So the thing is, these are the four basic differences between EBS and EFS, where you need to choose one depending upon the use case. So if we talk about that which service is better, it doesn't matter what is the requirement or what is your use case. It depends on that, right? It depends on that. So it depends on the requirement or use case where you are utilizing these services. Thank you. Right. So what are placement groups and why are they used? So a very common question which comes into our mind is that whenever we want to acquire some EC2 instances, right? Whenever we want to acquire some EC2 instances, how is that the AWS decides that which EC2 instance should be given to the user? So let us say that we have this AWS cloud, right? We have this AWS cloud. And these are the instances which are kept in the AWS cloud, right? And this is just a very, very simple scenario which I'm taking. Instance number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Now, how does AWS decides that, suppose if a user wants or if a developer wants two EC2 instances, right? Two EC2 instances. How does the AWS decides that which two EC2 instances should be given to the user? So very simple technique is that, you could acquire these two EC2 instances, you could acquire these two, these two, these two. You can go that depending upon the numbering, right? You can acquire these two, any combination can be taken, but this is not the case, right? This is not the case with AWS. Again, it depends on the use case, but more importantly, you have something called as placement groups, right? You have something called as placement groups. So there are three placement groups, namely cluster placement group, partition placement group, and spread placement, right? So before going on to placement groups, let us understand the terminology regarding the AWS cloud. So this is a basic terminology that, in AWS cloud, there is a concept which goes around, and that concept is the concept of hardware or rack, right? In which your EC2 instances or your machines reside. So basically, if these are your EC2 instances, and this is very vague idea of representing this. If these are your EC2 instances, this particular setup is called as rack or hardware. So this is rack, basically. This is rack, right? So we can see that in each and every rack, you have three EC2 instances, right? So depending upon the requirement, you can acquire, suppose a user wants to acquire, two EC2 instances, right? Or three EC2 instances, let us say, three EC2 instances. So it might be possible that you can acquire these three EC2 instances in same rack. So if you are acquiring these three EC2 instances in same rack, then you have cluster placement group for that, right? You have cluster placement group for that. Also to be noted is that each rack has its independent power connectivity and its independent network connectivity. Power network. Power network. Power network. So independent power and network connectivity. So if you are acquiring three EC2 instances and you choose to acquire these three EC2 instances in cluster placement group, these three EC2 instances will be given to you in the same hardware or same rack. So if latency is the priority for an application, or if you want that, user experience should be much, much, much better, then you go for cluster placement group, because you have each and every EC2 instance in a very close proximity. You have a common power and, network backup. But the major problem here is, again, with respect to power and network. That means if the power and network for this particular rack is gone, each and every EC2 instance will fail to serve or cater the request of the user, which will give the problem, which will spoil the user experience, because all your data, all your website, or your application is kept on these three EC2 instances, which you acquired under the cluster placement group strategy, right? So now there is another strategy, which is called as partition placement group, right? So partition placement group says that you can acquire more than one EC2 instances in, partitions, in different partitions. So this is one partition. You can say this is one partition, and no two partitions share the same rack. This is second partition, and this is third partition, right? This is partition number 1. This is partition number 2. This is partition number 3. So suppose if I want 4 EC2 instances, right? 4 EC2 instances. So we can acquire, and if the placement group strategy is partition placement group strategy, so you can acquire 2 from here and 2 from here. Partition 1 can give you 2, partition 2 can give you. So it depends, it depends on how many number of EC2 instances you want. So condition with partition is that no two partitions share same rack. Also, there is another condition, that is there can be only 7 partitions per availability zone. So provided in a single availability zone, there can only be 7 partitions. There can only be 7 partitions. Last but not the least, the spread placement group. In spread placement group, all of your EC2 instances which you acquire are given distinct racks, right? So if this is AWS cloud and you have these racks, right? And suppose you want to have 3 EC2 instances, right? 3 EC2 instances. So these 3 EC2 instances will be given in each rack. This is the one which you will get. This is the second. This is the third. If you choose spread placement group strategy. If you choose spread placement group strategy. So again, if you want high availability, suppose if this particular rack gets off, right? If for some reason the power and network does not comes on this rack, for some reason it goes off, then also you have 2 racks to cover it. So high availability applications, if you want, then you can go for spread. For distributed applications, for big data applications, you can go for partition strategy, where you involve a lot of data. For high latency applications, you can go for the cluster placement. So you will choose these cluster placement group at the time of, under the advanced settings at the time of instance creation, right? So let me show you. So if you go for EC2 instance creation, so under the EC2 instance creation, when you choose instances, and if you want to launch the instance, right? So under the advanced details, you can choose placement group right over here. So you can create a new placement group, and if you want to choose any placement group, you can choose it from here, right? So you can create your own placement group, and you can see that you have the option, right? So one thing which should be taken care of is that in spread placement strategy, you can only have 7 instances per availability zone. So if you require 8 EC2 instances, definitely one EC2 instance will be going in another availability zone. So you can have 7 EC2 instances in one availability zone, and then rest of the EC2 instances in another. Thank you.
Thank you for watching. Switch from non-IT to IT today. Explore www.thinkcloudly.com.